So, JM here, another episode of Pages from Sages, and I was reading today. This is from the works of John Wesley. This is volumes 11 and 12. John Wesley is one. I have very few spiritual heroes in church history outside of Scripture. John Wesley's at the top of the list. There's John Wesley, William Wilberforce, John Stott. Not too many others. Wesley, his life is just fascinating. What he accomplished in the world is unbelievable, and it's a shame that more Christians don't know about John Wesley. If they do, they just know him as, oh, isn't he that Methodist guy? Didn't he, do something? Maybe came to Savannah for a while and preached on horseback. But Methodism today is not even remotely recognizable to what actually John Wesley preached and taught. Shamefully. Wesley, he wasn't perfect. I mean, no person in history is. And his writings, I don't always agree with. There's some things where I take issue to him. But overall, his life and his legacy, you are hard-pressed to find another Christian outside of the pages of the Bible who would ever match what Wesley accomplished in his life. And I was reading through his works. He wrote so much. Actually have been to his house in England, and he had a saddle specially constructed that he could read and write on as he rode on horseback. He had a chair in his house that mimicked where he could literally bounce up and down like he was riding a horse to get used to reading and riding on horseback. He traveled over 250,000 miles on horseback and preached usually 3 times a day, if not more or less. And this is over the span. He lived into his 80s. John Wesley, the last letter he wrote before he died was a letter to a young British politician named William Wilberforce, and Wesley encouraged him. You can read it in his faltering handwriting, the original letter. But he encouraged Wilberforce to keep up his fight against the British slave trade, because Wesley knew that was the scourge of the entire British Empire, and that God had raised up Wilberforce for the specific purpose of putting an end to that abominable practice. And maybe that's that'll be another episode of Pages from Sages. But today I actually wanted to talk about, I was just reading through, and in his letters and his correspondences, he gives different, thoughts on this, advice on this, a letter to this. And this came from his little short thing he wrote called With Regard to Dress. Now, Methodism was named that because Methodists were very strict and rigid, and they were very methodical in how they went about doing things. But John Wesley was serious about being frugal, being no more than you needed to be, but also being no less than you needed to be, spending money in ways that always put first the needs of other people. And he lived it. His dying day, he left nothing but, a pair of shoes, a robe, a chair or two, and his house. And that was it. I mean, nothing was left when he was done. And so when he's writing to Methodists about how they should dress or how they should think about dressing, he's very good about giving his own advice. Hey, this is what I advise you to do. And he gives advice about, the fashions in London and how so much of it detracts from people's actual spiritual, physical well-being because it's based on status and rank and beauty, and we're all familiar with that today in our own fashion industry. But at the end of this little short, it's only 4 or 5 pages, he writes this: "Our carcasses will soon fall into the dust. Then let the survivors adorn them with flowers. Meantime, let us regard those ornaments only that will accompany us into eternity." And that was his mindset in terms of just how we should dress, how we should live, how we should spend. He goes on to say, "But if you would recommend yourself by dress," in other words, if you try to impress people by how you dress, "is anything comparable to plain neatness? What kind of persons are those to whom you could be recommended by gay or costly apparel? None that are in any way likely to make you happy. This pleases only the silliest and the worst of men. At most, it gratifies only the silliest and the worst principle in those who are of a nobler character." I love how he just basically calls out the whole dressing to impress, dressing to gain status, how you adorn yourself, not just your clothes, but also jewelry, makeup. In our day, we'd say plastic surgery. All of these things that we do without putting a blanket condemnation on them and saying, don't do any of it. What he does is points to the principle and he says, who are you trying to impress? Because you know the people that are actually impressed by how people dress are the people who are least likely to make you happy. And I love how he says that. And then he goes on to say, and this is, again, he's saying this to the people who are not blessed with what we would call good genetics, good aesthetics. You know, he's saying, if people don't normally look at you as anything amazing, don't go out of your way to try to reach that level of status by your outward adorning, because those are not the people you want to impress anyway. Those are the people who are the least likely to bring you happiness if you have to dress or look or change your appearance in such a way that to get them to notice you. Then he says, to you, whom God has entrusted a more pleasing form, to you guys who are good looking already, those ornaments are quite needless. You don't even need all that stuff. You're already good looking. And he quotes a poem. He says, the adorning thee with so much art is but a barbarous skill. 'Tis like the poisoning of a dart, too apt before to kill. You don't put poison on a dart that's already going to kill. That's the metaphor, I guess, in this English poem that he quotes. But he says that is to express ourselves in plain English without any figure of poetry. It only tends to drag them into death everlasting, who were going fast enough before, by additional provocations of lust, or at least inordinate affection. Did you actually design to raise either of these in those who looked upon you? What? While you and they were in the more immediate presence of God? What profaneness and humanity mixed together? He's talking about people who dress to impress in church. People who go to church dressed specifically to be seen and looked at and appreciated and noticed. And he cuts right to it. And he's just like, what are you doing? One, it's not necessary. You're already attractive. Two, why are you even trying to raise these things in the minds of people when they're in the presence of God and you're in the presence of God and you're supposed to be there worshiping God? So again, Wesley people would say he leans towards legalism sometimes. That's a fair critique. But in doing so, it's not just rank legalism. He's not just saying, these are the rules, these are what you do because that's what I said. His motive is always to push to the heart, to press down to not the actions that people are doing, but what motivates those actions. That's what I love about Wesley. And then he ends, the end of this whole treatise, he says, now be a faithful steward. He's talking about okay, so I have all these clothes. Should I sell them? Should I throw them away? How should I dress? In what station in life? And he's just all of these examples, all these what ifs that people are asking in this treatise. And he says, now be a faithful steward. After providing for those of thine own household things needful for life and godliness, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, relieve the sick, the prisoner, the stranger, with all that thou hast. Then shall God clothe thee with glory and honor in the presence of men and angels. And thou shalt shine as the brightness of the firmament, yea, as the stars forever and ever. He quotes two passages from the Old Testament and one from the New Testament there. But I love what he says at the end. So he's given his advice. And Wesley makes clear this is his advice to people in 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s England. That's who he's writing to. But I love at the end how he says it. Be a faithful steward. Remember, our carcasses will soon fall into the dust. Then let the survivors adorn them with flowers. Meantime, let us regard those ornaments only that will accompany us into eternity. He didn't just say it, he lived it. And that's one of the cool things about John Wesley. It's one of the interesting things you read when you read his works. And it's one of the reasons that I am commending this episode of Pages from Sages on this passage in particular. So, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to Disciple Dojo's YouTube channel if you like these. Check out previous episodes of Pages from Sages to see who we've talked about before. And stay tuned for upcoming ones because we want to keep these going. Thanks a lot, guys. You gonna say bye, Brett? Nope. He's out.